what if, one point of time, those SOCOM procurement officers had their way with a Mark 16?
Now we find out.
We shall. Ready?
Yes, sir. Impact. Yeah, all right.
It almost feels like an AK. I don't know how to say it, but it's a very lightweight weapon system, and you can feel the bolt go forward and backward, but it doesn't translate into the felt recoil.
Yep.
So you just feel it moving and working inside. Okay.
200. Impact. Got it. Okay, 250. Got it. 300. Dead center. Nice. 350. Impact. Nice.
We're experiencing a slight right to left, I'd say 3/4 value.
Yep. All right, let's see it at 400. Dead center. Nice, dude. Those are stacked.
Nice.
Okay, 450. Okay, that's an impact. Nice. Impact. Okay, I'm on at 5. That one sailed just a bit high. Okay, just up right above his head. Dead center. Center punch. Nice. One miss.
That was it. That's cleared.
Yeah.
One miss.
I really thought you were gonna ace that one.
But
I thought we were gonna see our first completely clear.
I don't know why we're acting like it didn't do well.
Dude, don't unload that yet. You know we're not done. You know that if a rifle does that well, we have to at least try to take it further. I mean, I know it's a service rifle, but you're shooting 77s. Let's hit the gong.
Let's do that then. All right.
I'm going to reposition the camera here. All right. I'm on the gong. This will be at the 650 marker.
Yes. I'm going to use a 600 actually.
600 meter hold you should align, right? Okay.
Yep.
All right. Well, let's see you do it here. Quite a bit short, actually. You got to give it a bit more. Just at the 6 o'clock position. Impact.
Okay.
Nice, dude.
Done.
Nice. So, a couple shots to get us in there.
We've got to remember this is not kitted out, or this was not intended to be a DMR from the first place.
Right. True.
And we are really sailing into the DMR territory when we cross that 500-yard line, more towards the 600 meter-ish zone at 650 yards. So, I'm impressed.
I mean, that was a killer run. One miss at 500. Like, yeah, okay.
Yeah, look. Well, I kind of have to double back on this. I was hoping for this to clean the course with no misses. So it sounds really crappy that we're like, oh, it did so bad. No, it cleared it with one miss. I mean, that's pretty dang good. And that one miss wasn't because of the rifle being unable to hold the accuracy, but more so me giving it the wrong hold.
Right.
Me giving it the wrong hold was because I forgot that the reticle is actually for a lighter load, and this is a heavier load.
Right.
That's it. But still, I think this is a good time to cut to the debrief, and perhaps if we've got time, Josh, you guys don't see it until after this video, but maybe we should explore the speedy trigger on this thing. What do you say?
Let's do it, baby.
Hello there. I'm just here maintaining the 9-hole Scar so that it's always ready when I need it. But did you know that the first few times we actually took the Scar out to pattern it for accuracy, we actually had a very tough time getting any sort of decent results. And it wasn't until we determined that some of these screws here that hold the barrel in place had actually worked themselves loose. But how did we get to that point? Shooting hundreds of rounds of match grade .308 ammunition and working through the problem solving required to get the Scar functioning correctly. Well, it was due in no small part to the small but loyal community that we have over on Patreon, who support us with the financials in order to be able to go out and buy ammunition to perform these tests, as well as the emotional and intellectual support that, well, let's be honest, you all know we very much need. So we'd certainly like to have you guys consider joining us over on Patreon. And of course, if that's not something you're interested in, we'd very much like to also just simply hear from you in the comments down below here as well. Hope you guys enjoy the rest of the episode. Onward we go.
Well, welcome back into the Debrief Studios after what was a very, very good run. A near ace of the course. I'm not going to lie, Henry. After you cleared 450 clean, I thought this is in the bag, since, the 450 is always the line where things seem to go awry if they're going to on a really, really clean-looking run. But, you just had to rip it away from me there at the last second.
I will say, the miss was an elevation miss. It was not a windage miss, though.
True.
So, that is on me. That is on me if it's an elevation miss. Because windage is usually the harder one to get right, rather than elevation.
Yeah.
And partially, I've got to attribute the predictability and the accuracy of what we were able to display, at the range that day, on honestly some of those wind hold dots, because it was not a wind-free day at all. I mean, the atmosphere was moving in our location.
Right. Well, I'm sure we'll cover off a little bit more on the optic in a second, but I do want to ask you, tell me if you feel the same way. When we first started the 9-hole project, one of the initial classics we did was on the Scar, and then from that point, as we began the Practical Accuracy series, we had taken the Scar out with the intention to do it on one of the Practical Accuracy runs more than once. And we've been open about this in the past. We had taken it out and we had issues with it. We had consistency issues with it. This is the Scar 17. We had consistency issues with respect to the accuracy, with respect to the optics we were putting on it. Effectively, a string of things that take place over a period of time that really kind of had me like lukewarm with the entire thing once we finally had a working run. Did you feel the same way at that point in time? Kind of like, meh, I don't know.
Yeah, well, okay, look, the Scar has always been a thing that has caught your desire. And
I mean, it's a space gun. I like space guns. I'm here. Yeah,
but in particular with the Scar, and specifically with the Scar 17, it hits on some impossible balances for rifles. I think a lot of us, with the prospect of video games specifically, we get into this. I don't necessarily know if it's a fallacy or not, but we think that something has to give. There has to be something wrong with something. It can't be too good. And the Scar 17 is too OP on paper, right? You've got your lightweight system, low recoil, high accuracy. Impossible. Something has to be wrong with it. And so when we took it out, in my mind, the Scar 17, when we had failure 1, 2, and 3, on the range without realizing that it was a maintenance issue that we needed to tighten that one particular screw on the side. In my mind, I was like, yeah, this is overhyped. This is honestly the Scar.
Right.
It's just
it's just too built up. It's that, it's got the SOCOM charm to it. It's not really, no wonder they never adapted it.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. So for the longest time though, this is the feeling I had as well until we brought it back out onto the Speedway just recently this year as we launched the new series, the first one that we've just posted up.
And might I say, it was lit as they would describe.
It was to be honest, again, we're learning the course. It's not something that you have down and everything's great. Plus, it's an extremely challenging course. And you had a great run with the Scar as one of our openers. And so at that moment, I was like, okay, the things we learned about those small, little, tiny maintenance-related elements from our initial, stuff back when we really just, years ago at this point, all of those things carried through. It worked. Everything was great. And it lit the fire. I needed to get the 16 on the show. And thus, the 16 arrives.
Well, the 16, okay. And I think the 16, interesting enough, usually the smaller caliber is the one that more people have experience with, which the Scar is kind of backwards on this. You have a lot less 16s out there than you do the heavies. And so, at least we're talking about the U.S. market, and Americans who own firearms have less experience with the light.
I would agree with that. I feel like there's less of them around, it seems like. Whether that's perception or reality, you see less about the Scar 16. I think it's because it's kind of like the little brother, right? It's the little brother nobody really wants to hear about.
Well, specifically, yours is the black one, too, so you see even less.
Yes, the black sheep.
The black Scar 16 is kind of difficult to run into out there.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to lie. When you were first talking about the Scar 16, I was thinking, oh, yeah, okay, yeah, Scar Heavy did really great. But, presumably the Scar 16 is just like any other Wonder 5.56 that we've seen out there. Mm-hmm. That, including the Bren, including the G36. It's just another one of those. But sure, why not? But I will say, not only does the Scar 16 also accomplish a lot of those impossible balances of many things, let's say accuracy, not just weight, but portability, because it has a folding stock, which is important when you compare it to an M4 or a 416. Let's see, accuracy, portability, and what was the next one?
You were talking about recoil, but that's kind of 308 centric. That's more 308 centric in my mind when you're talking battle rifles.
And on this, you add one other element. It's very easy to maintain, and honestly, the reputation that the Scar 16, not Mark 16, that was rejected, the Scar 16 has a reputation that it's very easy to maintain and very reliable in the field. Yours does have the reciprocating charging handle, which some people dislike. I personally think that's a personal taste, a training issue. That's fine if you prefer the AR charging handle or AK charging handle. It doesn't bother us because I feel like at this point we've shot enough Scars that we know not to lock our fingers right behind the charging handle.
I can understand we can understand it, but it's, Yeah. Well, and so that then kind of takes us down a slightly different point of conversation, but I think it's a good point to cover off, which is when we look at the attributes that this rifle has, it's modern manufacturing. It's a 1-in-7 barrel with, good tolerances and whatnot. You've got 77 grain ammunition, and it's optics ready with a good optic on it. When I think about those four things together, and we threw an aftermarket trigger in, so 4 plus a bonus, I'm really thinking to myself, it probably should have performed pretty darn well. Or we probably would have been disappointed with it, especially when you start thinking about the price tag.
Now you've brought something up that is usually what people like to argue about on the internets with the price tag. Is the juice worth the squeeze? Is the cost worthwhile to you? Could you do 90% of these things with an AR that costs less than half of it. Like a quality AR costs less than half of this.
Yeah, and the current marketplace, yeah.
Right. And it could do most 90% of what this could do without folding the stock. Well, you could put a law folder on it, but then it's just
Still, but point being, you're like 90% of the way there for sure. And you might even get some advantages in certain areas, right? Like I personally, between those two things, I think the AR recoil is actually better than the SCAR. I think the SCAR recoil is a little bit more. Or maybe it's a little different. It's just slower.
I guess from the marksman perspective, especially a prone marksman shooting a KD course, I don't feel that recoil differentiation between the 5.56. I will say on the SCAR, now you had the ACR stock. The cheek riser on either the ACR or the actual SCAR itself, very similar. I actually really like that feature from the marksman perspective, because you could just drop that if you are trying to run heads up, and that's actually a really, really nice feature to run on a rifle. It comes down to, whether that last 10% or whether that 10% is even a thing for you is worth the extra cost to it.
Yeah.
Or if it's worth LARPing a Belgian special operations operator. So that is up to you to decide, not up to us. Now, Josh seems to think that it is worth it, which, respect. I think it's a good rifle.
So we have now shot some high quality ARs on the course where we went with 77 grain ammo. And I don't know about you, but in my opinion, the 77 grain ammunition, the longer round with its much better ballistic coefficient, really does, along with some of the more modern manufacturing that were in the guns that we're using to shoot that round, really has been the defining factor, again, in my opinion, of what has separated those so dramatically compared to some of the other rifles that we've shot over the years. Some of which cannot shoot those because they're run with a too slow of a barrel twist, right? So when I think about some of these, I'm thinking like the MR556 and the HK416 that we had on the show some time back. I'm thinking about something like the What Would Stoner Do AR, which is another like one we brought on the show recently, shot with 77s.
Right.
And one that we may not have released yet at this point in time, but was one of the direct competitors to the Mark 16 back in the early to mid 2000s, and the whatever it was, 2008 to 2009 area, where there was really debate about what was going to be SOCOM's go forward option, and that is the Block 2. Now, I don't want to get too much into that here, but what we know about those runs is that they all went very well with the 77s and those more modern rifles. So,
and in high winds.
Right.
Not What Would Stoner Do, but the rest were all in high winds.
That's right. The dead day.
Yeah.
So
the blessed day.
Yes, the blessed day. So that leads me then to a point of conversation, which is if I think about something like the 416, the MR556, or the Block 2, or something in this vein, price of the thing aside, because we've already sort of touched on that and, the challenges surrounding that. Do you see yourself leaning one way or another? Like, would you go for one over the other? Or
yes,
do you think
there's a definitive reason?
Okay,
yes.
Well, let's hear it then.
Mechanized operations. Bottom line, the folding stock is very valuable. The G36, the SCAR, having that type of folding stock and being able to roll out of, let's say, a Bradley, a Striker, an MRAP, any of those vehicles, having a folding stock is much nicer to dismount from them. And I mean, let's say if you're in a soft skin and you need to shoot out, it's also a lot more easy to maneuver a folding stock than a buffer tube designed stock.
Right.
And yes, I know people are going to argue about the law folder, but you only get one shot, and then like you have to put it back together to cycle the round before you could fire another one. So in my opinion, that's not a permanent solution.
It's a good storage
and-
solution,
and-
right? It's a good
Right.
storage or carrying solution, but not necessarily a use solution. Yeah.
Right. So in this instance, I do think, when you get a lot of the reliability, I mean, when they're performing pretty equal on recoil reliability and portability, or recoil and reliability, then it comes down to portability. How well can you use it in confined spaces?
What
right?
about the weight distribution on these particular setups?
This is something interesting. I thought that the Scar Light was lighter than the M4 Block 2 initially, until Josh corrected me and showed me actually in person that it was actually dispersed a lot better. And I agree. And that's coming. I obviously am not a human weigh, so when I picked it up and I felt that the weight was dispersed a lot better than, let's say, an M4 Block 2, where the weight is all in the front because of the RIS rail. That felt heavier. My transitions between targets were slower because of that. But with the Scar, having a better weight distribution, with it dry, your transitions are faster. But with it even hooked up with your IR devices or anything, still that helps you, because that's
Right.
weight that you put onto the front. I mean, more weight on the front is not necessarily good in that aspect. So having a better balance, having more of the balance shifted to the rear, helps the short range maneuverability too. In that aspect,
And I want to clarify on this point, just that what we're talking about specifically is that in the configurations in which we had these. So you guys will, if you're seeing this right off the bat, the Block 2 is coming. Fear not. But what we're talking about here is specifically how we had them configured side by side as Henry was shooting them, and that was the perception: is this must be much lighter than this. And in actuality, when we put them on the scale, they're very, very close. Within a couple ounces of each other. So it was very similar, very comparable. But one definitely felt the Scar. I agree with you. It feels much more pointable, and I think all of that comes down to the weight distribution within the setup.
Now, on that note, we ran a different optic than a new optic that we actually just got. That is an extremely lightweight optic. I mean, this was the Primary Arms PLX-C.
Yeah, it's the
so
compact, right?
It's similar to the previous PLX that we showed on the AK4D, in a sense that the specs are very similar, but on the spec sheet, it's much lighter than the PLX, the old PLX. Both of them are Japanese glass. There were two gripes that we had with the old PLX. One was on the weight, and then the other one wasn't the reticle per se.
It's for me. I mean, it was more for my gripe personally, and that is when I'm using a reticle on 1 power, I really prefer thick stadia in the optic to draw me into the center point of the optic, and because I don't really care even what's going on there. If I'm using it on 1 power and I'm shooting for speed, all I really need is like these big arrows telling me this is where to go, and my eye sort of focuses in on that point. And the old PLX, the original PLX, it was the opposite. It was actually just the horseshoe in the center with the Griffin mill that we had. So a phenomenal optic reticle for distance, but wouldn't have been my first choice for close range. That's been adjusted.
If we were to weigh the two towards who it seems to be designed for, the PLX, the old one, the 1-8, seems to be designed for someone like me. Someone, when you're talking about a longer distance, a designated marksman, where weight is less of an issue for the march. In fact, weight could be a positive factor if you're trying to soak up some of the recoil and get faster follow-on shots. And you would be using that with the Griffin mill with more faster follow-on shots and seeing where the shot dropped. When you decrease that much weight, I mean, something about the glass, I don't know about you, I felt like it was a little bit more vivid
In the original one?
in the original one than the new PLX-C. But all that taken aside, and talking the pluses for the new PLX-C, and not the old one on the AK-4D, and there's a lot of acronyms we're jamming in here, the newer primary arms PLXC is lighter weight, has a 1X that is much more favorable to the assaulter, has a much simpler and easier to use reticle when it comes to like a 5.56 rifle, just jamming it from 0 to 600. All of that to focus on the needs of the assaulter, which is what the Scar 16 would have been intended for.
I think just to hop in there to hit on that point. I think when I think about those two optics, I think that they actually fit perfectly between the Scar 16 and the Scar 17. As in the Scar 16, I want the PLXC on it, and on the Scar 17, I want the original PLX on it.
Yeah, I agree. And on the stadia, what you were talking about, basically the crosshairs that lead up to the center dot, I would say from a military perspective, and I know you typically look through things, you typically look through the lens of a competitor. You look for the daylight bright optics quite a bit. I know.
Yeah.
But from a military perspective, batteries may not be a luxury that you're typically accustomed to having around you. You may not be bringing enough batteries to survive your optic being switched on for hours, days upon or weeks upon weeks at a time, which these are not intended to be switched on all the time. So having the Stadia that could be working in a non-battery environment to where it is comparably easily picked up by your eyes at a 1X, I think that is a very good addition in that aspect from the military aspect to the PLXC.
I actually agree completely. I prefer it for that reason as well. Even from a competitive perspective where you could basically get to dial your illumination off and on, I've never put a premium personally on daylight bright illumination within the optics. It's something that I usually talk about in the LPVO videos because a lot of people do put a premium on it, but I personally don't care that much about that because in some instances I've shot matches entirely with the optic dead. Like with my LPVO with no battery in it because it died because I left it on, So
but that's honestly LPVO, it's just a different technology for illumination. Mm-hmm. You could do that with an Aimpoint's diode, but the LPVO's diode illumination is just not set up for that type of operations. Mm-hmm. So I think it's smart when you start looking at alternate ways of using the optic to where you don't have to rely on a lit diode. Now, the PLX, the old PLX, it is the way it is. I really wish they did have the same Stadia.
It'd be cool, yeah.
Yeah, but that was an older generation, and it seems to fill the marksman role very, very well. So I'm not going to sell that one off anytime soon.
Yeah.
But to veer back to the rifle, I don't... Do you have anything else to add to it?
3 quick points. We can just fire these off. Reciprocating charging handle. It's a Scar video. It's a reciprocating charging handle model of the Scar, not the newer non-reciprocating ones. In some of the past videos, we've made commentary about it because you, in how you shoot, have a tendency to place your hand on right where in the track of that charging handle. We didn't talk about it in this run at all because this was probably about like 2 months of working with and around Scars more frequently than we normally do. And what did you sort of figure out during that period of time?
Well, it turns out when you train yourself around a particular rifle, or it could be a vehicle, or it could be anything out there, you learn to work with quirks of that particular weapon system. Mm-hmm. It's sort of like, the gaff where the FSB agent charges the AR, or the American spy goes to pick up the AK and it's the same thing. That's a training thing.
Yeah.
So if you learn to avoid, if you use a system, then you'll be all right. I mean, I had an issue with the Scar because you're the one with the scars. And through our time really working the scars through this time frame, I don't have that issue anymore.
Right.
And surprise.
Are there still instances where when you're shooting around a certain piece of cover or through a certain port, it could become a problem? Yep. Same is true of an AK, right? And now it's not necessarily exactly the same because of its positioning, but that is still something that could happen. But we've made the point about how it impedes where we like to put our hands or why we have to put certain accessories on the gun in the past. The more we've used it, I think the more we decrease that level of commentary amongst ourselves.
Now, with the reciprocating charging handle, though, there are pluses to this.
Agreed. Yeah.
I mean, I know it's a big thing about forward assist, whether we need it or not. But if you are in the military environment where you're shooting suppressed a lot and you haven't been cleaning your weapon, the gas system, takes a lot of that away. But having some type of silent closure system is nice in certain times that you realize you need it and you don't have it.
That right there is a good way to say that without anything else.
Yeah. With also, the reciprocating charging handle is also immensely easier to clear jams than a T handle on the AR or MCX, because if you do have a fatal jam on the AR or MCX, you can't kickstart it. You have to mortar it, and there's just no way. It's easier to clear jams. It's just a simpler method. It's the AK type of mentality. Anyways.
So point number 2 then that I want to talk about, the KDG stock. Now, you referenced earlier the cheek piece, which is present on both the stock UGG boot and the KDG stock. But I want to talk about the stock specifically. For me, I feel it's a little bit sturdier. It just feels a little bit more solid. But did it make a material difference to you? Could you really tell a material difference behind the gun? I mean, even just between the 17 and the 16, where we had the UGG boot on the 17 and then the KDG on the 16. Could you even really feel a difference between how the stock felt in those two instances?
I can't tell you if I felt a difference between how it felt, but the KDG certainly looks aesthetic in that particular arena. So there you go.
Right.
And looks are half the battle, as they say.
That's right. You gotta look cool. Last point. The addition of the forward rail, which is also a KDG rail, gives you some additional coverage for accessories mounting and also gives you a little bit more coverage over the barrel so that if you are placing it onto a rest or a bag to shoot off of or a piece of cover to shoot off of, you've got more surface area before you start contacting barrel. Your thoughts on that particular accessory or adjustment? It's something that I have on both of my scars. Did you notice it at all, or do you think you would notice the lack of it?
No, I mean that's always nice to have more place to mount stuff and or shield it from the bag. Which I've got to say, the bag touching a free float barrel is a pretty. We get that every now and then as a comment that, oh, your bag is touching the barrel. No wonder it's the accuracy's off. I mean, it could be a possibility, but it's far overblown and a lot of what a lot of people say.
I think a lot of that come down to like if you're like pinning the rifle down to help like try to shoot it from a mounted position, and you're just putting all of your force down on the barrel.
So let's say if I were shooting an RPK, which is an enlarged AK with a long barrel and the bipod is attached to the barrel. RPKs are horrible on single shot accuracy for a reason, because when you jam that thing down like you should, you load the bipod like you should on a machine gun, you impede that type of force on the barrel.
Yeah.
But I mean, it doesn't matter when you're doing automatic and you're just, trying to walk fire in. When it comes to a free-floated barrel, yes, if I rest the barrel on, let's say, a horizontal rest and press down upon it or brace it against something, that is absolutely going to cause issues. But if I'm putting it on a rest, more chances it's not going to be as big of an impact as you would think. That said, the KDG handguard covering the rest of that and giving me extra rail space is always a welcomed feature, of course. And what do you say? It's like 1 or 2 ounces?
Yeah. I mean, it depends on the length of it or whatever, and which one you choose, and this and that, and which generation. There's a lot of little bits
bottom
and
line, no.
bits and babs.
I don't think that was a huge issue at all.
Oh, cool.
I mean, it was a welcomed change with the rail space.
There you go. So, any final thoughts on the Scar, or is it just a space gun that shot really well for you?
It's a space gun that shot very well for me. I do think that there are features, if you were to take the current configuration with all of those bugs worked out, reciprocating charging handle or not, and place it back into the 2008 or 9 trials, I think it would have fared significantly better. I think it would have, at that point, been a competition against the M4. But that's looking back on things. It has a lot more competition nowadays that come out at a lower cost, significantly lower cost. So whether that is worth it is up to you to decide. But my question to this, Josh, is now that we know it shoots very well, how do you think it would perform if we were to really press it on speed?
There is only one way to find out, right?
There is only one way to find out. We know. You and I, we know. But you can come back when we publish the Speedway episode on the Scar 16. And, oh, it is good.
It is good. Guys, see you next time.
Impact! Neutralize! Impact! Neutralize! Impact! Neutralize! Impact! Neutralize!
716 is 096, 4 Vic, 8 packs, Redcon 1, green to green. How copy, over?
296, this